Good morning, everyone. My name is Rohini Arora. I'm the MLA for Burnaby East and the chair of the Select Standing Committee on Children and Youth. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are here on the territories of the Lekwungen, including the Songhees and Kosapsum nations. This morning, we will be considering two reports: Office of the Representative for Children and Youth, No Time to Wait, a review of MCFD's Child Welfare Workforce Part 2, and Too Many Left Behind, Ensuring Children and Youth with Disabilities Thrive. I would like to welcome the Representative for Children and Youth, Dr. Jennifer Charlesworth, to the meeting, and I will turn it over to her for the presentation on No Time to Wait, Part 2.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Chair, and nice to see all of you again. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the territories with deep gratitude to the keepers of these lands, and also to introduce my colleagues. You'll be hearing first from Alan Marquardt, who's a former deputy and continues to work with us, thankfully, working on legislative and special projects. He will be joining me in as we talk about No Time to Wait. And my colleagues, Samantha Cocker, who is one of the deputy representatives, Blair Mitchell, who's the executive director for Individual Advocacy, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit Engagement. And Sam and Blair will be joining me on Too Many Left Behind. And we're fortunate to welcome John Yakalashik, who is the executive director of Reviews and Investigations. He is based in Kelowna, so he often doesn't have the opportunity to join. So we thought that would be really helpful, given that that's such a critical area of work as well. So as a way to begin, I just want to set the context for you. We have provided you with some slides, and of course you've seen the report. And we'll reference these slides. There are things there for you to take a look at from time to time. I'll say, take a look at a specific slide, but we're basically going to work through the report for you. I want to situate it, though, in the context of Don't Look Away. And you will continue to hear me reference Don't Look Away because it has set the North Star for a transformation of child-family well-being. It was based, as you know, on the investigation into the tragic death of a little boy in the Fraser Valley. And then through his story, it illuminated the systemic issues that we were seeing consistently across all of the work, advocacy work, reviews and investigations, and our systemic work. And so it's one of those unusual things that takes a look at a child's story, it illuminates the systemic issues, and it addresses those systemic issues and sets a path forward. One of the areas that we identified as a systemic issue was that of the workforce capacity. This is an area of practice that requires humans. And if you don't have humans that are, there are sufficient numbers of humans who are skilled, able, and supported to do the work, then you can't do the work that children need. And one of the things that happened after the tragedy became known in the media was a comment that it was about the workers. The workers had failed this child. And I've been in the field, as of all of us, for long enough to know that it's rarely an individual worker. The vast majority of workers are doing the absolute best that they possibly can, but it's the systems that are impeding the workers from doing the best work on behalf of children. So we knew we needed to take a look at this more deeply. So this is a companion report to Don't Look Away. There were two parts. We did part one right away when we released Don't Look Away, because we thought we wanted the Ministry of Children and Family Development to get moving on a number of things while we did deeper data analysis. So we're presenting to you part two, and Alan will explain in a few moments how we went about that. But suffice to say, it was a very deep analysis. And we wanted to figure out what it was that MCFD in particular needed to address. Now, again, as you know from Don't Look Away, we looked at the healthcare sector, education, et cetera, Indigenous Child and Family Service agencies. That is not taking a look at that broader workforce challenge. Obviously, there's an awful lot of talk about the workforce challenges in health. This is very specific to MCFD. So just with that context, I'm going to pass it over to Al.
Thank you. First of all, just to be clear, this report is about MCFD child welfare social workers. It does not include Indigenous Child and Family Service agencies, and there's Two reasons for that. One, in the particular case in Don't Look Away, was a case being managed by an MCFD social worker, not by an agency social worker. But also, the Indigenous Child and Family Service agencies are situated very differently. They have different levels of delegation. They have different human resource policies, different sources of funding. Some are unionized, some are not. In contrast to the ministry, which has kind of common policies, common funding arrangements, common delegation. So if you were going to look at the Indigenous Child Family Service agencies, it really would require a kind of special study separate and apart from this. There was a wealth of information brought to bear in these two reports, review of literature, review of a number of past reports about social worker capacity, MCFD documents, a lot of their data was provided. They have very limited human resource data, I might comment. We did a survey of MCFD social workers, 739 responses, as well as MCFD managers, got 57 responses. We had 6,278 narrative comments on those surveys, which were analyzed. We also took a look in part two at the government-wide workforce environment survey, which has been done for the last 20 years or so, but never has MCFD actually teased out and looked at social workers alone. They always look at the ministry as a whole. So we looked at that. We had 12 focus groups of social workers and team leaders, and we had several engagement sessions with community partners. Just as background, the issue of workload and caseload and the inability of MCFD social workers to be unable to comply with practice standards has gone back for 30 years. It goes back to the Gove report in 1995 and probably before that. There have been a plethora of reports and reviews that have been done since that time, not simply by the representative's office, but also by the BCGU. The ministry commissioned a report in 2017 by Bob Plekas, a former deputy minister. They all have said the same thing over the years. Moreover, the ministry's own audits, they do audits of compliance with practice standards, have shown consistently over the years very substantial non-compliance with practice standards across all child welfare functions. In this particular case, what really captured a lot of attention was the fact the social worker didn't see the child for 7 months. And that's a pretty egregious example. The policy requirement is to see a child every 3 months. However, in 2021, there was a provincial audit of care plans, which found that there was, across the province, only 7% compliance with that standard. And in fact, in 30% of the cases that were reviewed, there was no record of a child being seen in the last year. The point I'm trying to make here is that this issue of understaffing, overwork, and inability to comply with practice standards has been present and known to the ministry for essentially for the last 30 years or more. So sadly, what happened should not be a surprise to anyone. In 2019, the ministry established a workload measurement tool. That measurement tool found that the ministry needed 636 additional FTEs in order to achieve 85% compliance with practice standards. Not 100%, 85%. So the ministry knew at that time. And in fact, between 2019 and the end of March 2020, 2024, there's only been a 3% increase in the workforce. So obviously, that issue has not been addressed. The ministry abandoned that workload measurement tool. So the ministry, if you look at the slides in the deck, the ministry will tell you that while the number of children in care is decreased, it's almost half of what it was 15 years ago. It's gone from roughly 10,000 down to 5,000. But if you look in the chart in the deck, that would imply there's less work. That, in fact, is not the case. What has happened is a number of kids in care has gone down, but the number of kids in out-of-care options, for example, being supported by grandma or auntie or cousin, has increased in parallel. When you look at the total, it's been roughly 10,000 for the last 15 years consecutively. And in fact, social workers tell us that doing these out-of-care options actually is more work than bringing a child into care. The point there being that the workload and caseload really hasn't changed over the last many, many years. Our survey found that 80% of social workers say they're unable to properly do their jobs because their workloads are too high. More than 2/3 of the excluded managers agreed that the workloads of social workers do not allow them to effectively support children and families. And it's important to say that this understaffing, excessive workload affects everything. It's not simply the capacity to comply with practice standards and do the kind of job that they're expected to do, but it affects their health and wellness. It affects sick leave rates, which are much higher in the ministry than other ministries. It affects worker retention and departure, and the departure rates in the ministry are much higher than other ministries. It affects their ability to participate in training and professional development. In fact, we had focus groups where social workers weren't able to attend because they were called away for crises, which was an example. They told us that happens constantly with training, that they're simply unable to attend. It also affects their perceptions and satisfaction with executive management and with the ministry itself. In terms of health and wellness, and what we did in our survey was we included some questions on stress and workload, and these were taken from a survey that was developed by the Mental Health Commission of Canada. It's a validated survey. The net results of this was that the degree of stress and workload experienced by MCFD social workers is extraordinarily high. 88% said that they experience too much time pressure at work that causes, significant degrees of stress. 90% say they experience stress from mental health fatigue from the work. You have to remember this is very tough work to do. And moreover, in terms of the kind of supports that they receive from the ministry, more than half, 60%, indicated that they do not get adequate debriefing, counseling, mental health supports to help them carry on with their work and to cope with the stress. On the government-wide workforce environment survey, MCFD had the second lowest of 29 ministries and agencies on a subscore around stress and workload. So turning to, in this particular case, with Colby's case, it was an Indigenous First Nations child. More than almost 2/3 of children in care are Indigenous. They're hugely disproportionately represented. It's obviously crucially important that social workers are knowledgeable of the relevant legislation, that they have appropriate training, and know how to apply it, and that they have available culturally appropriate resources to support them. Nearly half of social workers, 47%, say they haven't been given sufficient information and training about federal and provincial legislative changes. You say, well, slightly more than half have. Well, nearly half is pretty substantial given the disproportionate number of Indigenous kids in care. Again, slightly more than half say they do not have the necessary knowledge, skills, and support to work effectively with Indigenous children, youth, and families. And nearly 3/4, 71%, say they do not have timely access to the necessary range of culturally appropriate family and community support services to meet the needs of Indigenous children, youth, and families that they work with. In terms of turning to training and professional development, none of this is a very pretty picture, as you're probably gathering by now. 3/4 of social workers say new hires are not provided sufficient onboarding, initial training, mentorship, and supervision. MCFD social workers were at the 11th percentile for professional development on the government-wide workforce environment survey. Namely, 89% of government workers were better. The 3/4 of social workers say they're not provided the adequate coverage and uninterrupted time to engage in training activities. Again, nearly 3/4, 73%, say they're not provided sufficient training and opportunity to understand new standards and policies when they're introduced. Only half of social workers think that the information system, it's called ICM, that supports their work is user-friendly and an effective tool. Nearly 2/3 say their office does not have sufficient administrative support. And these things are important because they go to the issue of their capacity to do the work, to have the technological, administrative, community supports in order to allow them to do their work not only effectively, but efficiently so that they're not scrambling on their own. More than 3/4 say they can't keep up with the administrative tasks on a weekly basis. And again, more than 3/4 say they do not have timely access to the necessary range of family and community support resources to meet the needs of children and families. In terms of organizational culture and management, MCFD had the lowest score on the 2024 Workforce Environment Survey of 29 ministries and agencies for a subset which is known as organizational satisfaction. Namely, they're not happy with their organization. And that was for MCFD as a whole. When you tease out social workers alone, the scores were even lower. The same was the case in terms of social workers' views of executive level management, namely the lowest in government and across the board. The same was true in terms of their views of vision, mission, and goals. Almost 3/4 of social workers say they do not have confidence in their executive, namely their ADMs and deputies. We know we work with the ADMs and deputies all the time. I think that at the heart of that is the perception of line staff that executive has not delivered in terms of relieving them of workload pressures, of caseload pressures, and of providing effective kind of supervision and supports and mental health supports. It's not so much a comment on the individuals, I think. There's also a huge problem within the ministry in terms of, what we've called a culture of fear. Social workers are always looking over their shoulder about, am I going to be in the crosshairs of the next very high profile, very public case? Is that going to be one of my cases that go wrong? Am I going to be blamed, as other social workers, as Jennifer mentioned, were blamed for something that may well not be my fault because I can't cope due to the workload and caseload pressures? And all this kind of culture of fear and the perceptions of the ministry has a real reputational problem. When you talk to students in social work schools, in universities and colleges, they, by and large, are not interested in joining the ministry because of two things. One, they're well aware of the huge caseloads and workload problems, and it's a crisis-driven ministry. And second, they also hear about these very high-profile cases, and they're fearful that they too, if they join the ministry, will be blamed if something goes awry. Kind of lastly, as it's all been a bad picture so far, there are some good things to say. First of all, one of the real strengths that came across in our surveys was the view of first-line supervisors. Not every organization has some supervisors not so great, but by and large, there was a widely very positive view of team leaders, first-line supervisors, who are seen by their staff to be very supportive of them. That's a really good starting point. The second is social workers demonstrate, a huge regard for their coworkers. There's a whole lot of collegial support in their work. And lastly, and I think this is really important, is social workers, where do they get their greatest degree of job satisfaction? It's actually from the children and families that they work with. These are really committed individuals who want to make a difference. If you look at the Workforce Environment Survey, you have 82% of social workers say that they find their work meaningful. And that's what keeps them there, notwithstanding far too many leave. And I'll turn it over to Jennifer to do a quick review of the recommendations.
Great, thank you, Alan. And this is the first opportunity we've had to bring forward a report to you with recommendations with this committee. So I'm just going to take a moment to let you know how we build recommendations. Susie will know from having been with us before, but the rest of you will be new to this. So as we do our work, we're constantly thinking, what would be the kinds of things that would make it a meaningful change that could actually affect the differences that we know are necessary?
Sorry to interrupt, Dr. Charlesworth. I just wanted to mention that we are coming up to 25 minutes.
Yes.
Want to make sure we have time for question and answer. So just want to let you know we have a few minutes left.
Yeah, thank you. So we identify those options. We actually do discuss them with the ministry, not to change our minds necessarily, but to understand, is there a way that we can frame them that would be most effective? We set timelines, and then we do monitor them. So for this, we identified 17 recommendations, and we addressed really the same kinds of areas or buckets that Alan spoke about. We started talking about qualifications and oversight. We have suggested that there be a number of things done to take a look at what's called expanded credentials. It's not just people with bachelors of social work, but it's other degrees. But we want to make sure that those degrees are relevant to the work that's required, and for that there being really strong onboarding training for new hires. We've also addressed an issue that has existed almost the whole time of my career, which is 47 years of mandatory registration for child welfare workers. So we've made a recommendation pertaining to that. that there be an independent professional regulatory body, probably for social workers and then social service workers. I think the public needs to have that kind of confidence. We also spoke about staffing, recruitment, and retention. Alan mentioned the workload measurement tool. If you don't know what the status is in terms of the workload, then you aren't measuring it, then you don't know if you're making any difference. So we said bring back the workload measurement tool and use that and be transparent about it. Use that to make your budget asks, et cetera. And that will enable the funding to follow the staffing requirements. We also said we have to take a look at compensation. There are other professions in the public service that are getting bonuses for signing bonuses or top-ups, et cetera. This is really hard work. This is really important work, and we need to address the compensation as well. We spoke about training and professional development, and particularly with respect to working with Indigenous children and families and their communities. And we also talked about the importance of recognizing that participating in Indigenous cultural ceremony is part of your professional development. It is part of being connected to community and understanding the cultural milieu and the context within which you're doing your work. Right now, staff are expected to do that on their personal time rather than seeing that as part and parcel of the work and relationships. We also talked about leadership and mentorship, and of course spoke about the health and well-being. There are things that happen that continue to haunt me, I can say, from early on, and it's really important that when difficult things happen, when we lose a child, when there's been a crisis that we've been a part of, having those opportunities to debrief, to have that kind of support is really important to mental health and wellness. Having access to counseling in order to process the trauma that you're observing and seeing, and then being able to understand how to support people to do their best work. So we identified those 17 recommendations. All of them have specific timelines attached to them. The ministry has said that they're working on all of them, and we have started to see some changes. Of course, it's still early days. We released this report in February. I will stop there, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions from committee members? I'll go with Susie first.
Thanks so much. Thanks. Nice to see everybody. Thank you very much for yet again a very comprehensive outline of where we're to. So the workload tool, workload assessment tool, how complex was it in terms of, like as a nurse, we had workload assessment tools, and sometimes it would take us half an hour in our day to put out all the stuff that we had worked on. And so it would tend to fall off the side of the desk because it took too long and it was too complicated. Is that a component of the tool, the workload tool, that perhaps made it stop?
No, I don't think that was the reason it stopped, although in fairness, the question's been asked and it's a bit of a mystery as to why it stopped.
Okay.
I don't know if this is true, but I used to be an ADM in MCFD. I suspect they didn't want it documented, how short they were. Yeah. But you're right, it is a complex exercise that you have to look at specific kinds of activity. You attribute a certain number of hours or work effort to that activity. You total them up. And yes, it does involve, if you're going to apply it on a routine basis. In this particular case, it was done on a macro basis, a provincial basis. So they looked at, instead of having social workers filling out forms and whatnot. But if you're going to apply it on a routine basis, yes, it does create more administrative tasks to some degree, although that can be streamlined by an effective information management system.
Okay. I've got many more questions, but I'll wait.
Thank you. And over to Amelia.
Thank you so much. I read these reports with great interest. And one of the links that was provided, I think it was in part 1, not part 2, was to a BC GEU report from 2014 on the exact same topic. And I was struck by how nothing has changed in 11 years, and it's literally the same problems. And the first thing that I wondered was, if this is unionized staff, at least some proportion of them are, why are we not seeing action from the union? Why are they not striking? These are clearly mentally unsafe workplaces. I believe the statistic was 90% of the social workers surveyed said that they were under an incredible amount of stress. So my question is, why are we not seeing union action?
Well, the union can speak for itself, but, I can say the union has been very actively involved in bringing these issues forward. There was the 2014 report. They actually participated in this survey. The survey was sent out through the BC GEU because we felt that social workers would have greater confidence in terms of confidentiality if it came through their union. They assisted us in terms of the development of the questions. We've consulted with them throughout. I know that they brought these issues forward to the ministry. They're in the midst of bargaining right now. Whether the union goes on strike, that's up to them. But they have been very active in raising these issues with the government.
And just to add to that, I think the other thing that's important is that workers are very dedicated to the young people that they're serving. So they don't want the disruption of the care and support. So it's always a tension for workers because they know that if they are not providing the services, then the vulnerability of the children increase. So they're not likely to be walking off the job.
And if I could add to that, at the end of the day, they're deemed an essential service, so they're unable to walk off the job, right?
And I'll go ahead with Heather, and then we'll have Susie follow up.
Thank you. I don't need to turn that on, right? Excellent. So I guess you mentioned at the very beginning that this was not about the nation's piece of MCFD. So will there be a report on the nation's piece of MCFD that we can look forward to at some point?
No. It was a couple of things. One is to understand the service delivery. There are agencies, Indigenous Child and Family Service agencies, that are delegated by the ministry in order to deliver services. They are delivering services to, of the 204 nations, my math, it's 120 are being delivered, receiving services through Indigenous Child and Family Service agencies, and 84 are not affiliated with an ICFSA. But as Alan said earlier, each of the ICFSAs, who are nonprofits, have different kinds of governance and organizational structures. Some are unionized, some are not unionized, some they've got different policies. They've also got very different funding streams, a significant number or a significant amount of federal funding. Sam's the pro on this one, and feel free if you wanted to speak in on this one, but what we felt was the primary responsibility we have right now is to MCFD. The ICFSAs, as you know, are also working very, very hard around jurisdiction, the federal legislation embodying that. So we felt it was not appropriate for us to do an ICFSA specific one, nor would it even be very easy. Well, it would definitely be very difficult to do. I don't know if you wanted to add anything more, Sam?
No, I think you got it, because of the jurisdiction piece is the other part, as some agencies are being folded into their nations as they resume jurisdiction. It would then alter the review as well, because it will be very different once again for them once they move out of delegation agreements.
And just one thing there, that the ICFSAs operate under a different set of standards, and in fact, some of those standards are more demanding than they are of the ministry, for example. a visit is required with the child is required every 30 days, not every 90 days, so it's more demanding. If you look at the MCFD audits, in fact, the delegated agencies do better than the ministry as a whole. It's not that there's more work to be done on their part, but across the board, it's better.
The one piece that I would add, just to Jennifer's comment about the different funding streams, is that agencies who receive most of their federal funding, they were able to present to the government a needs-based budget. And so some of those agencies are operating, especially for young people who are really struggling, some of their caseloads are 8 or 10 kiddos on a caseload, whereas the ministry and other ICFSAs, their caseloads are far beyond 25, 30, 40 even, so makes a huge difference.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Thank you. So I understand that a new hire was recently made in the last couple of months. The department, what was the name of that?
You talk about the provincial Indigenous director?
Yeah, yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Thank you.
The Indigenous Child Welfare Director.
Right.
Is that right?
So, yeah, so I'm just curious how that weaves into all of this information.
Interesting. I think obviously the new provincial director is going to be taking a look at all of this material, but his primary responsibility is associated with the Indigenous Child and Family Service agencies and with the services provided to Indigenous children. So again, getting back to what we were talking about before, it's kind of like comparing apples and cars. So anything else you wanted to add there?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Thank you.
Susie, go ahead.
You said that the care planning tool, the care planning wasn't consistent, let's put it that way, and visits weren't consistent. And so, given caseloads and such, that is a challenge. But I would think that, is the charting that they do, is it electronic or is it still paper?
So,
You're laughing. That's a problem.
So one of the ministry's responses to this was to not only reinforce the policy, this issue of visiting is pretty critical, and it's fundamental to have eyes on children. Right? So they reinforced the policy, did some training, they introduced a new app, which actually provides for tracking of every time a social worker visit, so they can, there's a far greater degree of accountability. They introduced this process, and it was very effective. In fact, the visitation rates increased to 90% plus. We need to be very careful here about whack-a-mole. If there is no greater capacity to do the work, yes, you can shift the work over and require social workers to see children, which is extremely important, but they don't have any more time, which means what else are they not doing, right?
Okay.
And just to speak about the plans of care,
Yes.
we did a report some time ago now. Yes, you will have remembered that one. And those are also really, really important because, again, if we don't have a good sense of what is the trajectory, what are we trying to wrap around a child so that they can be successful in the various aspects of their life, and who's going to wrap around those children and what their responsibilities are. So we remain concerned about the plans of care. And as Alan said, you're constantly, as a worker, you're constantly juggling. What do you do here? Because you've only got a finite amount of time. So plans of care are also really important, but it's very difficult. We have a tremendous amount of empathy for workers trying to do it all, including those plans of care.
Any further questions? Okay.
What exactly are the federal transfer payments to the province when a First status child is apprehended? I know that there's federal monies that come into to look after that child per month.
Sure, I would say that's a very good question, and one that we tried to uncover in our Crossroads report a few years ago, to really look at the inequities that are out there, because with the CHRT rulings, the inequities actually started to reverse. So kids on reserve were getting more, and kids provincially were getting less. And the ministry couldn't provide to us the actual amount of the transfer payments. They had no good indication as to where their Indigenous money was going, and how it was coming in, and then where it was being allocated to. And that report, they've not responded to any of the recommendations in that report either.
I was just going to say that. Yeah, it's a report called At a Crossroads. It was March of 2022.
2022, I think, yeah.
2022, and I think that's such an important point. There's actually a visual, happy to share that with you, but a visual that shows these different buckets and the tremendous inequities depending on where you live and what your status is. And a lack of ability to track the money and what happens when it comes into the province for kids that are unaffiliated.
Amelia, go ahead.
Thank you. My question is about the level of participation in this survey. I know 700 is a lot, and I'm sure it was a lot to go through, but 40% actually seems quite poor to me of their participation in light of how serious and important these issues are. Looking back at the BCGEU report from 2014, they didn't express it as a percentage, but they had over 3,400 responses, and this only had 700. If I'm reading the report right, it's 40% of staff participated and 40% of managers responded, which the manager piece is the one that I think bothers me more, because that's pretty important to your role as a manager. If there's these huge systemic problems that are preventing your staff from being able to do their job safely, I'm very confused as to why that number is so low. So can you comment on that? And of the managers, it says there's 57 responded. I'm not great at math. How many managers are there actually numerically? Do you have that information?
So first of all, you can't compare the numbers on the BCGU report from 2014 to this, because the BCGU report in 2014 covered a much broader range. It wasn't just social workers, it was agency workers, it was workers with the Ministry of Social Development.
Okay.
So it was a hugely different potential population. Yeah, I was a little disappointed at the 40% mark. You know, one of the problems, I mentioned that we distributed it through the BCGU. Unfortunately, as it turned out, there were a lot of missed people. And we had inquiries going, you know, right up to the last day of submissions of people saying they hadn't received it. So, you know, the GU mailing list was not complete and somewhat out of date. So I think we missed a lot as a result of that. Actually, a 40% return rate on questionnaires is pretty high. By and large, generally you see in the area of 25% or something like that. The number of managers at ballpark, about 140 or so. Only child welfare managers, not all ministry managers. 40% rate, you know, I can't really explain why that was the case.
I think part of it is workload. This was a very extensive
that's
survey.
true.
And we did, the calculation of the 40% was on what we had understood the number of child welfare workers were, not based on the number of people who got it. So if there were, you know, like 1,200 people who received it, but actually 1,700 people that should have received it. We're still calculating on the basis of the 1,700, not the 1,200.
Okay,
So,
that makes sense. Thanks.
Any more questions? Amelia?
Yes, thank you. One of the things that keeps coming up over and over again is how terrible ICM is. It was a big feature. I'm sorry to keep referencing it, but I just can't believe this problem is at least 11 years old. I think I had read somewhere in one of these reports that there was some work being done to develop a new ICM. Does anyone know where that is, or did I just fantasize that?
fantasy. Do you know? I know they've talked about
Not that I know
tweaking it.
of. There is a reference in the report to the Human Resources Information System, and there's being redeveloped, a new system. It's a system called CHIPS, which identifies, things like the characteristics of individuals who were hired and when they left, and professional, all the kind of human resources related activity. That in fact is not an MCFD system, it's a government-wide system. It's an archaic system. I gather it's a few years away from being redeveloped, but that's different than the ICM system. And I'm not aware of it being redeveloped. There's always tweaks.
Yeah. And I think that's an important thing. The ICM system is also a system that's not just MCFD. It's also shared with social development and poverty reduction. So trying to redo, and you've probably heard, we've all heard horror stories where big management information systems, you've got a 2-year timeline, you've got X budget, and you go twice the amount of time and twice the amount of budget. So this is not to be done lightly. And it's a very difficult task to figure out how best to do that. So I think they're working with a system that that definitely has its flaws, but it's also something that has been around for a little while, and you've also got that kind of continuity of data over time. So they continue to do the tweaks and the improvements, but it would be a massive undertaking to redo that system.
Oh, yeah, it'd be a couple $100 million,
Easy.
at least.
Easy, yeah.
Sorry, I'm going to be really silly here.
M means,
Integrated case management.
okay.
Yes.
So it is the same. Okay, thank you.
Yes, yeah. It's a bit of a misnomer because we often talk about integrated case management as a practice. We
Yeah.
try to coordinate ourselves and do integrated case
Teamwork,
management.
yeah.
Exactly. But this is, the ICM refers to, in this case, the system, the
So
management
it's the charting
information
tool.
system. Exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay.
It's where you enter all of the kind of information
Everything,
about
yeah.
what's happening.
And
Yeah.
often it takes up more time than the visit does.
This is true.
Yep.
This is true.
I'm a case manager. I know these things.
Okay. Next on the agenda is consideration of the second report from the Office of the Representative of Children and Youth, Too Many Left Behind. I will again turn it over to Dr. Charlesworth for her presentation.
And we're just going to do a little bit of shifting here. Sam's going to come beside me. Okay, thank you very much. And Sam Blair and I will guide you through this work that has been done. Just want to say right at the very beginning, you will probably hear, we refer to children and youth with disabilities as a broad category of young people that have disabilities and are being served by health, by education, by Ministry of Children and Family Development. You will often hear the reference to CYSN, or Children and Youth with Support Needs. We've made a distinction because CYSN is a program, and we're talking about the children in this case. So just so that you know where we're going here. So again, we've shared slides with you, but we'll walk you through and look forward to your questions. So The RCY has been in existence since 2006. 2007 is when we were created. And within the period of 2007 to 2017, there were 6 reports pertaining to kids with disabilities. And then I joined as the representative in the fall of 2018, and in that period of time, we've done another 6 reports pertaining to children and youth with disabilities. It's a very significant area of concern and interest for us, advocacy, reviews, and investigations on our systemic approach. So we've been shining a light for some time. There are very consistent themes across our reports. Sometimes our reports have taken a look at specific groups of young people. For example, our excluded report on kids with FASD. Others have been more expansive, and we've also included an investigation. But there are some very significant consistencies across all of these. One is there are inequities across the spectrum of disabilities, with some kids getting little to no services. So kids with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, Down syndrome, significant behavioral challenges associated with their neurodiversity, there is very little available to them. Primarily, the services and supports have been focused on kids with autism. So we've got inequities. Another key theme is lack of access to timely assessment and diagnoses. The other one is, and that has been an enduring problem, it was getting better and then COVID happened and we continue to have some significant challenges there. Third consistent theme is lack of supports in the early years. So when children are first, the parents are beginning to wonder, like, what's going on? And I'm not sure how to do this work. And getting the early help at the time when developmentally it's most effective to intervene in the life of a child to increase the opportunities for them to thrive. The fourth theme is limited access to services in some areas of the province, especially those more specialized services. If you are in Fort St. James, you are not going to be getting much access to services just because of the nature of the geography. Increasing school exclusions, and that has really escalated since COVID as well, and that creates a whole tumbling effect on families when kids are not able to attend school, and of course a significant effect on the child and their development. And the final big theme that's recurring is families and caregivers really need help to navigate. This is a very difficult system to try and figure out what to do, even if you've got individualized funding for autism. How do you find the services? How do you contract with the service providers? All of those kinds of things, especially, as I say, if you're just hanging on by your fingernails trying to support your child. So there are consistencies throughout. We're not alone in raising concerns. There is a very active disability community. No doubt you are hearing from family members and from service providers in your constituency offices. And the disability community has been, in the past, very fragmented, but we've seen a real, I think, in large part through the work that we've done and the relationships we've been able to build, we're starting to see some real coalition of the disability community and finding their way through together, and of course wanting to lift up the well-being of all children. We have been calling for some time for changes in the system to try and address the inequities and to ensure that all children have the supports that they need when they need it to thrive, but we have not seen the progress that we would like to see in that area. The other thing I just wanted to point out is, you may not be aware, but this committee and a previous iteration did a report of your own, children and youth with neurodiverse special needs, and many of the themes that were identified after this, the committee, the previous committee, went around the province are the same kinds of things we've raised. So if you haven't read that, that's a very important document for this committee, I believe. So we monitor recommendations, of course, but we also wanted to figure out, like, what's actually happening on the ground. So let's just take a look at the trajectory over time of what's happened. In 2018, we released a report called Alone and Afraid. It was an investigation report, a very heartbreaking situation of a child and family that had really not got the services and supports that they needed. The Minister Conroy at the time made a firm commitment to develop a new approach to children and youth with, at that time, support needs or special needs. And so engagement began. That was phase one of engagement, and a draft framework was brought out in 2021. That framework received a lot of pushback from certain groups. Some people celebrated it, some did not. And so the Premier paused the work on that in 2022, but supported the launch of 4 family connection centers. Now those are in the Northwest and in Kelowna. There are 3 in the Northwest and 1 down in Kelowna. Important to note that's only supporting 4% of the kids that might be eligible for these services, but nonetheless they were launched to try and see if that was a model that might work. Then the province engaged in another round of engagements from 2022 to 2025. All that work is just kind of rolling up. They distributed funds to disability community to do the engagement, and now the work, as I understand it, is beginning to try and figure out what would a new framework look like. In the meantime, though, there's also mandate letters in the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Children and Family Development to realign and to, as we understand it, to transfer a lot of the disability services over into the context of the Ministry of Health. So this report is again related back to Don't Look Away. The little boy that we had, it was the focus of Don't Look Away, was a child that had significant health and developmental disabilities. We didn't dive deeply into that into Don't Look Away, but we addressed this within the context of this work. And again, as I said, we've had a number of recommendations. We wanted to make sure that we took a look at what is the experience of children and their families. It's one thing to say, progress is happening, but is it translating into the lives of children and families? So we embarked on this report, and I should speak to, thank you, Sam. We were very fortunate to bring in Dr. Karen Bopp to assist us. So Karen has spent her whole career working in this area, and she worked with us for about 18 months and really brought this to life for us. And if she were here, she would be reading you a quote that I'm going to read. She's now actually leading the National Autism Network. So we're excited for her, the work that she's going to do there. But we call it, the slide is what is the breaking point? And I'm just going to read you a quote because it's important to understand, to situate the families in this story. So this is from a parent. From my own experience, you get to the point where maybe your child hasn't slept for 4 days and you're physically exhausted. You haven't been able to go to work, so you're worried about your finances. And then you get to a point, to a place in yourself, and you go, I can't do this anymore, right? Like that's just an awful feeling where nobody else can take care of my child and I can't do this anymore. So I'm going to harm myself, or I'm going to harm my child because that's the only option and the only light I see going forward. And then she goes on to say, we're failing as a province if that is how people are feeling. And actually just 2 days ago, from an MLA contacted me to share a story about a family, and it was a family that we met when we were up in the Northwest in 2023, and it's got worse for them. So I'm really carrying her and her son in my mind today. So we felt it was really important to dive into this work and better understand what do we need to do and what do we need to understand and raise it up again because it's so critically important. So just to give you a sense of the volume here, there are over 120,000 children and youth with disabilities in this province. Each year, between 55,000 and 83,000 do not receive adequately funded, publicly funded supports and services. There's a very elaborate calculation that we did. Karen brought in a tremendous amount of information that no one disputed. And no one has disputed the calculations. So think of that 55,000 to 83,000 children who do not receive adequate publicly funded supports and services. What we found when speaking with families, and the over 1,100 families that connected with us on this work, plus our visits in communities, our interviews, our focus groups, like an extensive array of voices that we heard, is that families are being pushed to their mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual limits. They say 81% of the families said that they're struggling to navigate the system. And we also heard that the majority of BC families who have children with disabilities, that access to services is definitely not a given. They get on a wait list to access, to try and access assessments or to access services, but it's a wait list. And in some cases, I was hearing the other day, a wait list of 7 years. From the child was 4, the child is now 11. And in many cases, the services aren't accessible because they don't exist. We have workforce challenges and skill shortages in this field as well. Even those families who have access to autism funding are often struggling to get access to the services. So they might have the money, but they're not able to spend it. So further, we asked families, hey, have things got better or worse or stayed the same in the last 3 years? And 83% say that they've stayed the same or got worse over the past 3 years. Only a third, 32%, said that the services they receive meet the needs of their children, and less than 7% said that they feel confident that they will receive the out-of-school or in-school services that their children need in the next 1 to 3 years. They're not feeling hopeful, in other words. The other thing that we asked, which was extremely challenging, is have you considered placing your child in care in order to receive the supports that you and your family need? So 14% of families said that they have considered placing their children in care through voluntary care agreements or other means, abandoning, in quotes, just to get the services. So they're wanting to do the best for their child, and they're seeing that that is the only choice that they have. That rises to 16.5% for families with Indigenous children, which makes some sense because so many of Indigenous children are living in smaller communities where there's less services. So that is an impossible decision for families. And for those families whose children are already in care, a fifth of them, 20%, said that they made that decision to go to a voluntary care agreement or to some other, a special needs agreement, rather, because they felt it was the only way to secure the supports that their child needed. So they felt that the only option that they had for their child was to place them in care. So those are pretty sobering, especially if you take it in the context of that parent's, the quote. So let's take a look at funding, because you will hear that funding has gone up significantly for child and youth with support needs in the Ministry of Children and Families. It's risen 190% in the last 18 years. But we did some analysis there, and in reality, most of that increase has gone to caseload pressures. So if you follow the data, autism diagnoses are increasing significantly. So I can't remember what it used to be, but it's basically about 1 in 32 children now will be diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. So a lot of the funding has gone through the required or mandated supports for kids with autism. And also wage increases, because agencies have to provide services or to provide their staff with wages that have been negotiated, duly negotiated. So it leaves only 28% that's actually gone towards the growth to address the needs of the unserved or underserved children and youth with disabilities over the last 18 years. Now, there's been an incredible growth just in this last year. In the Ministry of Children and Families Development, they went from about $590 million last fiscal year to about $630 million this fiscal year. So that's significant. But senior leaders tell me that that's actually all caseload pressures. That's not actually something that's going to expand their capacity. Caseload pressures with autism funding, at-home medical benefits, because that has been increased, which is good, and children and youth in care. So where do we go from here? Well, there are a few things. As I say, we contextualize this within the Don't Look Away. We've got a number of recommendations out there already, so it was a matter of reaffirming some of those recommendations. But we also wanted to put it in the context of Don't Look Away, because that is our North Star. And what we're hearing is families are wanting to do the best by their children, and they're not able to. So one of the key things in Don't Look Away is the well-being of children and families. So shifting our mental model from protection into well-being, and then we widen the circle of people that can actually support kids. So what we've said is, as that work is being undertaken for child and family well-being, because there is a strategy and action plan being developed by government right now, that we have to include the needs and the interests of children and youth with disabilities and their families. So that was the key thing. We have identified within Don't Look Away collective responsibilities, so we lifted up some. One of them being, of course, well-being, the other one about supporting families, because families are, as we know, wherever possible, that is where children should be. So support the families in order to be able to fulfill their commitments and their passions and support for their children. And so we said, do that, bring in the expertise, support families, and in the defining what support families, early help in the early years means, make sure that you are understanding the needs of children and youth with disabilities. Don't just kind of take a homogenous approach to it. Take a look at what those kids need and get back to the principle of equity and adequately resourced systems that families can actually understand and navigate, that they shouldn't have to have, one of our advocates trying to help them navigate through it. It should be something that's more transparent. The other key area is accountability. One of the things that we found was it took us a month probably to go through the data to actually figure out, who are we talking about? How many children? How many children are being served? We don't have good data. We've said this over and over again. You're going to get tired of me saying it, but we need to understand who these children are, what they're receiving, what they're asking for, what the wait lists are, in order to be able to make good and informed decisions with the resources that we have. So we need to enhance our capacity around data in order to be accountable. And we also said that it's really important that as that data is being gathered, we're also understanding how is it making a difference. So being able to go back to families and saying, how is your life improving? And what are some of the things that are making a difference? The other thing that's so key within Don't Look Away is that this is not an MCFD only problem. These are kids that are needing to be supported well in the education system and the healthcare system. Families are often living in poverty, so they need supports through social development and poverty reduction. Housing becomes an issue. So this is, once again, the important element of putting this in the context of an all-of-government approach. So I will stop there and open to your questions.
Thank you. Amelia?
Thank you. I was very shocked at those two statistics. The first, 14% of families have considered placing a child in care to get services, and then the 20% who said that their child was in care and they made the decision because it was the only way to get services for their child. I guess I'm just confused about that, because if the services do exist, if they're in care, they can have the services. Why do they have to be in care to get the services? I'm sorry if I'm not meaning it to be a silly or glib question, but why are those services not then just offered outside of the child being in care, since they clearly exist?
Okay, we'll tag team on this one. So I think there's a couple of questions. It's not necessarily that they're going to get what they need when they're in care either. It's the family is at the breaking point, so they think that their child is going to get more. And of course, they are often brought into either foster care or group care. So, for example, if the family isn't able to get respite, then this is an opportunity for them to just kind of try and hold themselves together as a family when the child comes into care. Yes, in some cases, you're going to get more services, especially if you're in an urban area. They might be able to mobilize services by having attached to an agency that might have an on-staff behavioral interventionist or be able to do behavioral assessment. They might have more expertise in the service providers that are within that home, for example. But it isn't a guarantee that you're going to get the kinds of services and supports that you need. But when you're at their breaking point, you think that anything can be better than what you're dealing with right now. So, yeah.
The other thing that I would add is I think that lots of those kids end up placed in staffed residential resources where there may be services in that home. And that's not the best environment for kids, for sure. We know that, and that's a whole nother piece of work that we'll be doing. Yeah, and I think it's a false sense of protection or reality for kids that they're going to get more when they come into care. In some cases, maybe they get put up the wait list a little bit higher because it's one of the factors for a wait list is this child in care? So then they move up a bit. There's those kinds of things, but really I don't think many of those kids actually receive more.
Thank you.
Just a couple of points. There could be, I think in some instances, there can be a better coordination, though, of the supports.
Yeah.
Because an agency could have a behavioral interventionist or a behavioral consultant attached to their supports that they offer. Some families have that support, some don't. So I think there's a coordination effect. And as Jennifer's pointing to, I think you can't overstate it enough that families, the pressure they're under for, as the quote suggested, staying awake all night, 4 nights in a row, as a parent is very taxing and very different than having staff who are rotating, who are supposed to be awake at night, for example, and then you have staff coming in the next day that have slept and are fresh and can actually deal with the day-to-day care needs of the child. I think is also, it's just a very real impact, and families fight. I can attest to many conversations where families are pushing for those types of supports in their homes, but it's a battle to get them. And just one other consideration, I think it's important to note that as children approach the age of 19, families really worry about what next, because their children leave MCFD services and come into community living British Columbia services. And CLBC makes their budgets based on who's coming into service that's in care and who is coming into service that are living in their family situations. And we know that they base those budgets of children being in care as a priority because they have to deliver those services. They have to bring them into either continue the place where they're living, which is ideal, or they have to create a resource and find the funding to ensure that they can meet those needs. And children that remain at home, may not actually get access. They're eligible. What families experience is they're eligible for a number of supports and services, but actually what they receive is quite different in the first year to 2 years of that young person's life. So there is some families say, that 19, that age is approaching, and we know that if our children go into care, they're going to be prioritized in terms of that budgeting that Community Living British Columbia will do for the population of young people coming into their service.
Such an important point. Yeah.
Okay, Susie, go ahead.
Another thing that I think about is the impact on siblings. Have you done work on that particular point? Or, because it's always part of it, but I don't know that I've ever seen something that talks specifically about the impact of having a disabled sibling on the other kids, or multiple disabled siblings, and, because we know some families have multiples, and that impact, on the sort of life trajectory of, because we talk about the impact on parents being deadly, but it is also very hard on the sibs.
We haven't done a specific deep dive on that, but I can say that in the narrative comments, which were hundreds and hundreds of pages. That often came up, and we often see too in our advocacy work or in our and well, even in some of our critical injury reports as well, that there are situations in which families have to make the very difficult decision for kids to come into care because of violence, the impact on the siblings, the fact that the family is really starting to break apart. So we do see that more in the narrative comments. And we also saw many situations in which the families, parents speak about the guilt that they experience as well of not being able to provide the care and support for all of their children because they've had to put so much effort. And also the financial implications for the families as well, which has repercussions. But other things,
Yeah, no, I would just add, like, we did mention in this report too, the importance of families being able to access respite so that they can just be families with their other children and not always have to be centered around their child with a disability. And also that the mental health supports for families and for kids. When we were up in the north, that came across so loud and clear, just the lack of mental health support that was available for the parents or for the kids when they had children with disabilities in their homes. And so that's something that needs to be prioritized too from government.
Joan, please go ahead.
We had a situation where a young lady needed some support, and she was 18 years old, and you're considered a child under 17, but you're not considered an adult till 19. What happened to 18? So it has have the numbers changed?
well, that's an interesting one. Don't hesitate to contact our advocacy office for that one. That sounds like one that we could get involved in. But you're right that there are different age thresholds depending on the kinds of services. Now, that may be mental health services, because I think adult mental health services kick in at 18 and above, whereas what we're talking about with children and youth with support needs or kids with disabilities served by the Ministry of Children and Family Development, they are responsible up to the 19th birthday. And then thereafter, as Blair said, there would be a Community Living BC if the child was eligible for that. So I don't know if you've got something more to add on that one?
Well, I'm just thinking of the criteria, and it's off the top of my head, but the at-home program, I know that there are some gaps when somebody turns 18 to the age of 19, particularly around health supports and services. And so, again, we can get the information to be 100% confident, but I'm quite certain that the criteria goes to the age of 18. So there is a gap when those services won't be available. So that might be the situation that you're describing.
Yeah. But don't hesitate to reach out.
Yeah.
Heather, please go ahead.
Maybe you said it somewhere. I've written down a whole bunch of numbers, and it's probably in the report, which I'm not looking at. But what is the percentage of number of children in care with disabilities?
Yes, it's approximately 40% of the children in care are children with disabilities.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Okay. Is there any other business we'd like to discuss? Are the members potentially interested in hearing from the ministry about these reports? Yeah? Okay. Anyone like to move a motion to that effect? Amelia? We'll provide you with something here.
Oh, perfect, even better. I move that the Select Standing Committee on Children and Youth request the Ministry of Children and Family Development appear before the committee to provide an update on the status of implementing recommendations in the report of the Representative for Children and Youth titled No Time to Wait, a review of MCFD's Child Welfare Workforce Part 2, and further, to respond to the report of the representative for children and youth titled Too Many Left Behind, Ensuring Children and Youth with Disabilities Thrive at the Earliest Opportunity.
Members, you've heard. All those in favor? Okay, so moved? Carried. Or so carried, yeah. I've been in the other chamber too often, yeah. Okay. Anything else? Okay, in concluding our meeting today, I'll seek a motion to adjourn.
Can I say thank you to our presenters today, as always, and thank you for the work that you do. It's always, I don't know how you take the burden. Seriously, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Motion to adjourn? Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. This meeting is now adjourned.